King and Sir George!
Welcome back to Lessons from the Front into beautiful Thailand.
Today we're back at the War Games Holiday Centre here in Phuket to interview Bill about the Battle of Azincourt Part B.
So folks, we're with Bill, and Bill's got a different look on the Battle of Azincourt. So Bill, for our viewers, what would give you the credentials for having a quite a different view on how the Battle of Azincourt actually went?
Well, I guess I've always been a war gamer and a historian, therefore.
Right.
But more importantly, I was a war gamer before I joined the Australian Army.
Right.
I was a soldier for 25 years in Armoured Corps, but dealt a lot with animals and horses.
Right.
I'm a very keen horseman and served with one of my favourite regiments, the Household Cavalry, mounted.
So you were in the Household Mounted Cavalry?
Correct.
Right.
Yep, with the British Army on exchange. But also, I looked at everything from a war gamer or historian's point of view.
Right.
On top of that, after my 25 years, I eventually ended up being a farmer.
Yeah.
So I have a good idea of fields and how, contouring, how to plough a field and how terrain affects things.
Right.
And like I said, one of the oddest things is if you're going to plant seeds, you need fences to keep animals out.
Right.
So all those combined, and my love for Shakespeare's Azincourt from a very early age, Henry V, made me really interested. But I guess you look at things and you say, hang on, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
What's logical about it?
Right. Okay, so let's take a look at the battlefield then.
Okay.
So Bill, why does the battlefield look so different to the game that we played yesterday?
Okay, as you know, yesterday we had the conventional battle up here.
Right.
Where if you go visit Azincourt, there's a road running across where the archers are formed up, the English archers, which will put the battlefield there. The problem with that is it doesn't match the terrain for the actual battlefield. And to date, in that area, there's been no archaeological finds at all.
Right.
What we do know is that down here was where the original monument or chapel was built.
Right.
For after the battle. It was destroyed at some point and rebuilt.
Right.
I was there in 1998.
Okay.
And one of my officer cadets found a small part of a broken sword blade.
Right. So there is some evidence that the battle took place there.
Yeah.
Right.
With that, we also know that Henry was encamped outside of his town.
Right.
Conventionally, as per yesterday, he had to march around the town to camp on the other side in bad ground.
Right.
Here we put him what makes perfect logical sense. He's come up the road.
Right.
He's found high ground next to a couple of streams where you can draw fresh water from and protect his flanks, and got an all-round defence.
Got you.
Next morning, the French are still waiting for their reserves, the rest of the army to come up. They've come forward, thrown a few insults, trying to goad the English into wasting ammunition, because that's a finite resource.
Right, so there's a limit to the number of arrows that the English have.
Well, we know Henry could only bring 1 million to 1.2 million arrows on the whole campaign.
Right.
And we know that he used about half of them at Harfleur.
Right.
So that gives him 600,000 arrows. With 6,000 men, that's 10 minutes of firing at 10 arrows a minute.
So Henry had about 10 minutes of firing.
That's it.
On the day.
Yep.
Right.
Unless he slows it down, he could get 13 or 15 minutes.
Right.
And so the French have come up, they're going to goad him. Now we know the chroniclers tell us that they're yelling insults at each other.
Right, so they're close enough to each other to be heard.
180 yards is how far normal people can yell.
Right.
So to yell in here, they've got to be that distance.
Right.
So then we've got Henry running out of time.
Right.
He knows it's going to rain around 2 o'clock.
Right.
He knows the French aren't moving for some reason. If the French were up last night dicing for prisoners, who are they going to take? Why aren't they jumping on their horses or moving forward straight away first light?
Right.
There's no actual action until 12 o'clock.
Right.
When Henry tells his steward of the house, or his marshal, Erpington, to move the troops forward.
Right.
They break camp, lift up their stakes,
Yeah.
move forward 200 metres. Ermington then positions them and tells them where to put their stakes down.
Right.
And we know that from a lot of the chroniclers. And of course, the Padre in the English camp says it's in wedge shape.
Right. Now, conventionally, like as we played yesterday, the English are deployed almost in like these arrow-shaped formations, but it's very different today.
Yes, because the arrow-shaped formation is a later interpretation of a farm implement.
Right.
That one of the chroniclers used to describe what's going on the battlefield.
Right.
When you turn that farm implement, and obviously you're going to show one, upside down, it looks like stakes. It stops horses.
Right.
It's a long draw to get that looking like the arrow-shaped formations.
Okay.
Whereas this person, who knows nothing about limited knowledge of military stuff, knows everything about God, is looking at what's called a medieval wedge-shaped tent,
right,
and describes it as a medieval wedge shape.
Right. So the English are actually, logic says that they're actually deployed in the shape of a tent.
Yeah, a wedge-shaped tent.
And this is from the source of
the Padre in the English camp.
Right. So there's a cleric in the English camp, and from his view up on the hill, he can see the English are deployed in wedge shape.
Yep.
And he's in a camp, and the tents are wedge shaped.
Yeah. And they're called wedge-shaped tents.
Right. And they're called wedge shaped tents. Very interesting.
So then we're in. The other thing we've looked at is if you were playing any sort of game, or if you were doing anything, you had 3 archers and 1 men-at-arms, or 1 guy in armour, which we know that was part of the raising a company, the ratio that had to be done.
Right.
And we know.
So who would have asked for that then?
That's dictated by the king.
Right. So Henry would have said, you need 1 man of arms and 3 archers in that ratio.
And his company have it.
Right.
He's got 1,500 archers and 500 men at arms when he set sail from England.
Right.
And everybody else, his brother, everyone else is a 3-to-1. Anne Curry's done some fantastic work with the rolls.
Yeah.
But she's only come up with 1,000 names of men at arms, but 6,000 archers.
Right. So the ratio isn't quite right then.
Well, yeah, the ratio's not quite right. But we keep turning up other people who fought at Azincourt who were men at arms.
Yeah.
The more graves we find, the evidence that somebody else is there that's not on the roll.
Right.
So we're talking at a time that names could have been repeated. People have the same names. There are 7 bowmen called Baxter.
Right. And you are Bill Baxter.
Yeah, in Anne Curry's research.
Right.
So the number of, and there's a couple of John Baxters. I think there's like 2 or 3 John Baxters.
Right.
So
those could actually be all one person, for example.
Yeah, or could be a very common name.
Right.
Yeah, like Baxter means Smith.
Right. But logically, we have, according to Henry's precedent, we have 1.
Yeah, to raise the company, it's 1 to 3.
So it's a 1-to-3 ratio. All right.
And like I always say, people, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you put the men-at-arms guy first,
right,
and the 2 archers are behind him.
Right.
And in real life, you find that when people are doing LARP or medieval battles, they put the guy that's got the shield or the armour in front. And in this case, we've gone with logic. We put the guy with the armour in front.
Right. Right, so Bill, can you tell us about the command structure of both forces?
Yeah, in fact, both almost identical command structures, regardless how other people in modern times have interpreted it.
Right.
The first word we come across that's misinterpreted badly is the word marshal. We still have marshals in the cattle yards today, where they marshal and tell people where to go and where animals are to be kept.
Right.
It's not the word field marshal, it's not a command. It's the regimental sergeant major of the army.
Right. And do both sides have one?
They do. We've got Erpington in the English, he's the steward of the royal house.
Right.
Not the commander of the archers.
Right.
He just tells them where to go and says you can shoot.
Yes.
On Henry's order.
Okay.
But he sets up the camp, he marches the troops and makes sure they're in the right formation. And Bourchier, on the other side, the French marshal, does the same.
Right.
That's his job.
Okay.
So they're both involved in the orders group.
Right.
So then, just like every other medieval army, you have the commander-in-chief.
Right. So who are the 2 commanders-in-chiefs?
Well, we've got the commander-in-chief on the English side, Henry V, and then on the French side, you've got the Constable of France. Don't make me say his name.
Okay.
I'm not good with it.
Up on the screen, guys. There you go.
Up on the screen, right? He's the constable.
Right.
He's the guy in charge of the army.
Right.
After those, you had the next two commanders. You had the commander of the van and the commander of the rear guard.
Right.
They are the 2 IC and the 3 IC, the third in charge of the army.
Right. So who is the English? Who's Henry V's 2 IC and 3 IC?
Okay, so you've got the Duke of York commanding the van.
Right.
And then you've got Conway commanding the rear guard. He's an old veteran too.
Right.
Right. And you find these snarly toothed old veterans are the RSMs in both armies as well. I forgot to mention the marshals.
Okay.
Right.
And then for the French?
Same. They have a advanced guard commander and a rear guard commander. And they're the 4 men that are arguing or discussing what we now call wargaming the plan.
Right.
And so it's easy to look back and say there's no one person because one's of noble blood.
Yeah.
Well, Wellington suffered the same problem at Waterloo. There were more peers of the realm, than him. He had no problems ordering people.
Right.
And I just think that's one of the things people wanted to make hard on the French.
Right. So, Bill, with common narrative, a big part of this battle were the prisoners that were taken. Could you perhaps tell us your views on that?
Well, logically, or the way I think it's logical, is that, well, let's look at the conventional story.
Right.
Is that 500 French knights surrender to the English.
Right.
Because when they fall over, they're tired, they're chivalrous, they expect to be taken prisoner.
Right.
500 surrender,
yeah,
and then are taken to the rear or somewhere.
Yeah.
The dastardly Count, or actually de Lancel, Azincourt, and some peasants raid the English baggage, steal the crown jewels and other things, and English bedding, king's bedding, and these dastardly people make off with it. The king's worried that he's being attacked from the rear, so he orders all prisoners to be killed.
Yeah.
But the knights don't want to do it, so he tasks 200 trusted archers to kill them by stabbing their daggers through their
200
visors.
archers stab 500 French knights to death.
Through their visors with a dagger. A couple of things I find hard to understand.
Yeah.
How do you start killing 500 men without people being upset?
Well, if I'm part of the 500 and there are only 200 trying to kill us, I'm going to do something about it, right?
Yeah,
I'm not going to sit there like lambs to the slaughter.
They're not walking up with 3 daggers each, stabbing you. And that's another thing, being stabbed in the visor. If I surrender, I'm taking my helmet off.
Right.
I'll tell you, it's not the most comfortable thing to wear. Yeah, I'm out of that. My helmet's coming off.
Right.
So there's no need to stab me through the visor.
Right.
And daggers are pretty expensive things. It's a unique thing only to knights.
Yeah.
It'd be very rare for a men-at-arms to have a dagger as such.
Right.
Or maybe it's just a misdescription.
Could be.
The other thing is, why is Henry taking prisoners when the old flame has been raised, which means the French flag that comes out of a chapel, especially to travel with the army when they don't want to take prisoners.
Right.
As we said, when they're slurring insults at each other, whether the archers fire, the English fire first and the flag goes up, or the flag goes up as part of the insults. We're not taking prisoners.
Right, so we have a situation, we have the narrative that there were 500 prisoners taken, yet we also know that the banner was raised, no prisoners.
Correct.
So that is a little confusing.
Okay, so the 500 prisoners evolves 50 years later.
Right. So who tells us that there are 500 prisoners?
Well, it comes out of a secondary source. Now the primary source is 500 French nobles died.
Right.
None would take him, few would take him prisoner.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
there could be a confusion, a misinterpretation.
Well, we do know 2 or 3 tried to surrender. The guy that attacked Henry
tried to surrender,
but they cut him down and killed him before they rather accept his surrender. And remember, everything's written by the Burgundians in the English. There's no Frenchman telling the story later.
Right.
Although he started in the French camp, he lost his brother and father. Later on, he's a true Burgundian.
Right.
And by the time he writes his history, he's Burgundian. He's trying to vilify the French.
Yeah.
So let's look at the raid on the English baggage.
Right.
First of all, you're going to ask yourself, I'm the King of England, my crown jewels and my bedding, which must be important, and treasury are behind me. And according to most commentators, modern commentators, and our favourite William Shakespeare, there's only 1,000 boys guarding it.
Doesn't make sense.
And camp followers.
Yeah.
Crown jewels of England.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to leave them there in a tent.
Yeah, but that's with the narrative also with the camp is further away from the battle lines. Right?
Yeah, the camp's miles away.
But from a logistical point of view, a logic point of view, it's quite close to the English lines.
Well, one of the things we didn't talk about with the archers is the arrow supply.
Right. Yeah.
A strong guy can probably take 88 arrows with him into battle.
Yeah.
That's still not the 200 he needs to fire.
Right.
So even though they say they put them in the ground, that's fine.
But you can't put 200 arrows in the ground around you. They won't fit.
No, they won't fit. Not with 3 of you. That's 600 arrows.
Yes.
So you'd be standing in arrows.
Yeah.
So there's got to be the boys are running arrows forward.
Right.
Like.
So the arrows are quite close by.
Yeah.
So basically the baggage is close by, close enough for the arrows to be supplied.
And close enough to you to be able to protect it.
Yeah.
And close enough and important enough to have real guards.
Right.
You're not going to just let it sit there.
Right.
And then let's talk about the assaulting party.
Right.
Those dastardly peasants and the guy from Azincourt.
Yeah.
Which is confusing because the Duke of Azincourt is on the field and he dies in the battle.
Right.
The actual Lance Azincourt is a local lord, and there is another local lord who goes with him. But the man in charge is from Picardy, and he has a large contingent of men-at-arms and mounted men-at-arms and knights.
Right.
Now, remember, if there were peasants, we're talking about there's about 1,000 to 1,500 people in the baggage.
Right.
So we're going to need peasants to overpower them. Would have to be 1-to-1. So 1,000 peasants are sneaking around the battlefield.
Yeah, so peasants overwhelming peasants.
Yeah. Well, they're actually semi-armed, like both of them would be semi-armed. But the chances of being able to get in overall, so we're talking they outnumber them. They destroy the baggage.
Right.
They capture it. So we're looking 2-to-1 for an attack, or 3-to-1 most times. If we look at 3,000 peasants came round, that's more than the total peasant population, male population of Azincourt at the time. Right. So they're called out from far away.
Right.
And what's one of the modern historians say? Oh, they were hell bent on taking revenge. No, peasants hear war is coming, they run and hide.
Right.
They go off to castles and try to get. They're all hiding in the abbey.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm telling you, they're in the abbey.
Right.
Because the guy in the abbey mentions it.
All right. Okay.
Right. So now you've got a French nobleman from Picardy with a strong armoured force, and 2 people with local area knowledge. That really sounds like a plan. Let's go round their flank, let's strike the English in the rear and cause disruption that way, taking out the archers.
Right.
Another way of dealing with the archers.
Yeah.
That just so happens they strike the English baggage, have time to loot the English baggage, and as all the chroniclers say, all the boys were killed. Whether boys is just the valets, whether it's the whole camp, whether they run away, it's still a force to be reckoned with because they've got to get in and get out. They're not there when Henry turns around.
Right.
So later on, in 50 to 100 years, the chroniclers who are actually there want to justify it. They want to justify the death of every French knight on the field, and they want to make it chivalrous. It's got to have chivalry in it. And the easiest way to do it is say the French surrendered, and then because the baggage attacked, they were killed. Not that the French rose the flag saying, no prisoners. The English said, we're not taking any either.
Yeah.
Let's hit each other. And there's been a raid on the baggage from behind.
Yeah.
And of course, to make that work, the French raid has to be dastardly. So we can vilify peasants and we can vilify a couple of local lords, but where it falls apart, it's not a local lord.
Right. So an issue that we have with this battle is that we have very, very few primary sources. So it's open to a lot of interpretation.
We have 4 what we call primary sources. They're not witnesses.
Right, so they're not even witnesses. They're primary sources because they were there.
In the area.
Yeah.
At the time.
Right.
And so they heard or may have seen after.
Yeah.
But rarely do I think anyone saw exactly what happened. So we've got a English padre in the English camp,
right,
who identifies the shape of the wedge,
right,
and he's a man of God. I've got no problems with his testimony, but he doesn't see much.
Right.
He doesn't even hear
because he's in the camp.
Yeah, and he doesn't make anything up.
Yeah.
He doesn't hear Henry's speech.
Right.
He's very good about the wedge shape.
Yeah.
But leaves out Henry's speech.
Right.
We've got next to him, we've got a Burgundian who's attached to the English army as a herald.
And he's in the camp as well.
He's running between the two.
Okay.
He, for later historians, he's very factual in medieval times,
right,
because he's a herald. He's not meant to lie. He's not meant to emphasise anything.
Right.
But let's face it, he's a Burgundian, reporting about something as a victory.
Yes.
So
and Burgundians were eventually enemies of the French.
Within 10 to 15 years, they're the dreaded enemy. He goes on to be in the company that captures Joan of Arc and sells her to the English.
Right. Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So. That's
so not exactly pro-French.
No, definitely not pro-French.
Yeah, okay.
And on the other side, we've got a 15-year-old who just stays in the camp.
Burgundian as well?
Burgundian as well.
Yeah.
And admittedly, his brother and father died in the battle.
Yeah.
But he's got super X-ray vision. Because
Right.
he can see all the way to the English lines and identify people's coats of arms.
From 700 metres away?
Yeah, 700 metres away. Through the whole French army.
So not exactly a trustworthy source.
I think he had the right intention. I think he's trying to be, the man that he mentions that made it to the English lines may have been a friend or someone he looked up to, and he wanted to glorify their action on the day.
Right, makes sense.
And then, of course, we've got the abbey or the monastery, the monastery I called it abbey for, a monastery up behind the French lines, where he, again, a man of God, doesn't tell much crap. What he does say is there are 3 large pits dug after the battle.
Right. And from that we get an estimation of the casualties, is it?
I would say it'd be a dead giveaway, because he says 3 large pits. He doesn't say one big one, one small one, one little one.
Yeah.
He says 3 large pits. Now we know there is one conflict we know that everyone agrees on. The baggage was attacked.
Right, so we know the baggage was taken.
People were killed.
People were killed.
There must be a pit close to the baggage, because a lot were killed there.
Right.
Now, if we take all of them killed, that's 1,500. The whole English camp. Henry doesn't say that later, but let's say there's 1,000 of them dead there.
Okay.
I'm not dragging bodies all over the field to bury them.
You're putting the pit where the bodies are.
Which gives me 1,000 people in that pit.
Right.
We know that there's hand-to-hand in front of the English position.
Because Henry's crown gets smacked.
Because there's hand-to-hand.
Right.
And the pit's the same size as the one before.
Right, because all 3 pits are the same size.
Correct.
Right.
Large pits for 1,000 men. So there's one there, and of course then we've got the point of impact. And after bagging out the archers, they must have done some damage.
Yeah.
And it would be reasonable to say 1,000 men died in the impact area, which is huge. We're talking about, was it 5,400 French men-at-arms? If 1,000 died, that's a lot of people.
It is.
Yeah, that's a huge take.
Yeah.
So that gives us our 3 pits. That gives us 3,000 casualties.
Yeah. Combined, both sides.
Both sides. Because the English say they only lose, well, actually, there's 500 dead Englishmen in the pit with the Meliers.
Right.
Because the English say they lost 500, between 480 and 600 men.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
They've got to die there.
Yeah.
Because we know they're not counting the ones that die in the baggage.
Yeah, yeah.
So that means there's a 50-50 split on the ones that die in Melee.
Right.
The 2, and where the longbow did count, is 1,000 men here that died.
Right, so out in the battlefield. So there's 3 pits, one at the baggage.
Yep.
One at the point of contact, and one out in the field.
One out in the field.
Okay, so estimated losses are about 3,000 men.
About the same each side.
About the same each side.
Which is the irony. But of course the English didn't count their baggage.
Right. So then, if the losses were the same on both sides, history tells us that the English won this very famous battle.
Yep.
Would that make sense to you as a historian?
Yeah, 100%. The English held the field, and they were one of the agreements at the end of the battle is they were to march to Calais unhindered.
Right. So the French let them off the hook.
Yeah. Right. And well, they were not in a position when you lose that many nobles. And this is interesting. The casualties amongst the nobles took maybe 100 years for them to recover.
Right.
The flower of France dies in this battle.
Right.
So there's no one to organise anything.
Right.
The guy that was meant to be bringing up the 20,000 reserves is dead on the field. He raced ahead.
Right.
So, and of course Shakespeare later on, through his interpretation and the English Chronicles is written 100 years later, he reverses it. So that is part of Henry's talking before the battle, not after the battle.
Right.
So they march unhindered to the sea, and 3 years later, the French and English signed a peace.
So far, we've questioned a lot about the Battle of Agincourt, looking at the battlefield, the location of Henry's camp and the formation of his archers, and the reliability of sources. That raised bigger questions about history itself. On what grounds can we doubt a claim, and what counts as good evidence? Historians rarely have complete information. Instead, they compare sources, consider bias, and test ideas against the realities of the time. And for those of us reading history, it's a reminder to remain open-minded as new interpretations emerge. In this final part of this video, we'll take a look at another piece of the puzzle: the weapons, armor, and Bill's estimates of the numbers involved. Not final answers, but a part of how historians build knowledge from the evidence that survives.
So Bill, can you tell us what weapons and armor they may have been using at the Battle of Agincourt?
Well, contrary to what I was first told and what figures are made, my beautiful front rank figures here with their male aventail, a new armour had come out in around the early 1400s.
Right.
And it was the use of spring, be able to use spring steel.
Spring steel.
And have a more consistent steel by getting rid of the slag, and so the metal is actually stronger.
Right.
The other thing is the armour, the design being stronger, made the shield almost impractical to carry.
Right.
Because all you had to do is tilt your head towards anything, and the arrows just bounce off it.
Right.
And same with that style of helmet. So they'd gone to what's called the Great Bastille armour, where the shoulder plates and head together allowed you to bend down.
Right.
You know, you've got no weak point. You're now wearing a full armoured aventail under this. So there's nowhere that the arrow can strike other than metal.
Right.
So
so shields are kind of obsolete then, right?
Yeah. And you'll find that because their coat of arms is now being flown on the flag. We know they're wearing coats over their armour with their coat of arms on.
Right.
For example, the Burgundian arrives late, the Duke of Burgundy's brother,
right,
arrives late and grabs his standard and wraps it around him.
So basically, so people can see who he is, right?
But if he had a shield, he would have just grabbed his shield.
Right. Right, so Bill, we know that the French got right up to the archers and there was hand-to-hand because the Duke of York perishes on the battlefield. What sort of weapons were the French and English using in hand-to-hand combat?
So most of the men-at-arms had been in combat before.
Right.
There was a famous tournament, I think 10 or so years before, and you'll notice that they were using short pole arms. Axes, pole arms, and short stabbing rams. Not long spears, not halberds or bills that become an English thing later on, and although the French did carry them, they're for being close and personal.
Right.
And every man carries a dagger.
Right.
So what happens, you've got the initial clash. It's called, there's a new word for it now, called a dynamic action or something.
Right.
And it's so, if you ever want to see it in action, we sort of picked up on it in the American Civil War, where two cavalry forces would ride towards each other, stop and shoot it out.
Right.
And what we've found is that that's just probably happening all the way throughout history. Right. Two forces come running towards each other, and rarely is there a clash. More than likely, they stop. And if you go and watch a LARP battle or knights fighting on YouTube, you'll see they move together. No one runs and smashes into each other. They move up quickly and then sort of pause at this dynamic distance. And so that's why they've got shorter weapons, is because they know that dynamic distance is an arm and a half away from each other. Then comes the push. Once you're engaged, you're so tightly packed. One of the things the armour's doing is keeping you alive, because you can be pressed on front and back and still breathe.
Right.
So
the armour prevents you from being crushed.
Correct.
In the crowd.
In the crush. And that's why every knight's carrying a dagger.
Right.
because you can use it in the crush, in the press as it's called.
Right.
Although you find that we do know Henry had an axe swung at him, but it's a short axe. It's a small two-handed axe, not a huge halberd.
Right.
Because he tries to swing and get cut down pretty quick.
Right.
He's got no way, after his swing, he's got no way of defending himself, basically. So that's what both the English and the French are carrying. The other interesting thing is what's chopping people up that the English have.
Right.
We know they have mauls or big mallets.
Right. For hammering and stakes.
Hammering and stakes, and there are maul rooms in some of the English castles to have mauls, which means they're not a common weapon, they're valuable. You know, the archers may be an issue, may be carried in the baggage, but for the average soldier, he may have a hatchet, or more likely having a knife, not a dagger, but a knife, so he can cut food, so he can cut firewood, so he can fix things, so he can skin animals, and so he can stab a knight through the visor or chop him to pieces.
So Bill, I see that none of your French crossbowmen have pavises.
Yeah, well, according to the chroniclers of Grecian, according to later historians, they were left in the baggage because they were in a hurry to get forward. A lot of people don't realise is that 1415, the French had a secret weapon, and that was the spring steel crossbow.
Right.
So we always talk about the rate of fire of longbow being higher than crossbow. The range, extreme range of a longbow is about 320 metres. Right?
With wind or without wind?
Without the wind. Yeah,
Right.
50 metres for a strong wind.
Okay.
Which might push you to 400, but you wouldn't be firing as further than what you can actually see.
Right.
The crossbow, on the other hand, with a metal crossbow, this is a new weapon, and its drawstring is between 180 pounds to 240 pounds. It's slow, but it's got a range of 400 yards, 400 metres, sorry.
Wow, so it can actually outrange the longbow.
Hence, there's no need for pavis.
Got you.
And you can take your time and fire like you like. You'll find it turns up at sieges later on, but at Azincourt, it gets pushed to the back.
So why if they've got a longer range than English archers, my common sense would have said, put the crossbow forward and let them just shoot the poo out of the English.
Well, this is one of the unique things about Azincourt, is that for hundreds of years beforehand, the crossbow can't outrange the longbow.
Right.
So the general consensus of the French army is they're still peasants with bows.
Right.
They're not, you know, they are trained troops.
Yeah.
But the French don't hold them that regard. The other thing is they want to come forward and taunt the English.
Yeah.
You know, and when I go talk about the dicing, which for
So is this the night before?
the night before, the French nobles all meant to be dicing for who's going to get which prisoner and get to keep them.
Right. So the French move forward. The French men at arms, they move forward to.
Or they're somewhere
to mock the English.
Somewhere, then I think Henry's running out of time.
Right.
So what happens is we know that Henry gives Urbington the command to move forward 200 metres. So the army moves up stakes, moves forward 200 metres, and then the sledging, as we call it in Australia, or the insults start flying.
Right.
And at that point, Urbington gives command to fire. So whether the oriflamme, the French red flag for no prisoners, comes up before or after the firing starts, was part of the taunting, we can't be sure.
Right.
But it goes up and it's there.
So there's no prisoners on the day.
No prisoners. So why were they dicing for prisoners the night before?
Good
They
question.
had it with them in the baggage.
Right.
They knew they were going to fly it, and they
Yeah.
fly it. And so now we're going to talk about the longbow and basically all the weapons.
Right.
So the most famous one is, of course, the longbow.
Yeah. Okay.
And we've already stated that we've probably got 10 minutes worth of firing.
Right.
Let's talk about the arrows to start with.
Right.
Famous bodkin arrow.
Yeah.
You watch YouTube or you like, you can see it bouncing off armour everywhere.
Yeah.
One guy managed to penetrate some Indian armour using a later short bodkin, or the heavy bodkin called a plate cutter, which came out 1300s, between 1300 and about 1350. So it's still designed to defeat plate, as in coat of plates or mail, not full basket armour.
Right.
So the angles, along with the penetrating power, just aren't there. And there's probably 20 shows you can watch
right.
of it being defeated.
Okay.
All right, so the arrows we know can't actually penetrate the men-at-arms armour.
Yeah.
So on the lesser men-at-arms, yes, certainly the French bowmen. As far as the horses go, we know one horseman makes it all the way to the lines. He's the only one to make it to the English lines.
Yeah.
His horse gets the stake in the chest.
Right.
Which is a little bit dramatic for me. I've never been able to get a horse to run into a stake yet. Other than that sort of defeats the whole idea of a Napoleonic square.
Right.
But in his eyes, hits the stake, the guy goes over it and gets chopped to pieces by the bowman. Which goes into what's the English secondary weapon that can chop someone.
Yeah.
The other thing that makes us understand that the bow's not as effective as we were first taught conventionally is that the King of England loses one of his fer-de-lis off his helmet.
Wow.
He actually gets hit.
So Henry V was actually in hand-to-hand combat.
Yep, and the Frenchman, one of the French lords that tried to kill him, tried to surrender after that and gets killed whilst trying to surrender.
It doesn't seem very noble.
Oh, that's what happened according to chronicles. Then you've also got Henry's brother, Humphrey, being stabbed with a dagger and Henry standing over him, guarding.
Right.
So, and of course you've got the Duke of York.
Two very important men out at the battlefield in hand-to-hand combat.
And the second in command being killed.
Right. Who's that, the Duke of York?
Yep, on the flank. So it goes to show that maybe it's not effective. We do know...
I mean, the archery, the archer's not as effective because the French are able to get into hand-to-hand combat.
Correct. Yeah. Even though it may take them 10 minutes to get there,
the
English are probably out.
Yeah. So the common narrative is that the English longbow are so effective that they won the day, they mowed down the French.
Yeah, that and the stakes that were put there.
Right. But we have Henry and Humphrey and the Duke of York being killed very important men, probably not in the very front ranks anyway, but even if they were in the very front ranks, they actually were in hand-to-hand combat. So the French actually got all the way up to the archers.
If the longbow was so effective, why did they need stakes?
Yes, very interesting, yes. Right.
So they had to put the stakes out because they knew they'd get there eventually anyway.
Right.
Even if it was effective. And comparing rates of fire and casualties, we know from the Battle of the Neck, an Australian battle at Gallipoli, we had 510 men in 4 waves charge into about 30 Turkish machine guns and only suffered 68% casualties.
Only, but yes, 68%, right? That's huge. But what does the common narrative have the French suffering against the archers?
Look, it's over that. It would have to be around 80.
So common understanding is that the French suffered 80% casualties from archers that we know were probably not as effective as they say they were.
Yeah.
And Gallipoli shows us that even machine guns can cause that kind of casualty.
And it shows us the breaking point of troops too.
Right,
Once you lose 2/3, you're no longer effective fighting force.
No, you're not. No.
If you've ever went back to the first Gulf War and Stormin' Norman goes through the map and he says what effectiveness people are, which the Iraqi units are. He really emphasises those that under 30% are no longer effective.
Right.
So after taking a closer look at the Battle of Azincourt with Bill, listening to his perspectives, hearing what he has to say about how he's reasoned and thought logically about what may have happened, we're left with an important reminder. The past is rarely as certain as we may think it is. Even famous claims like the longbow supposedly wiping out most of the French at the battle, it starts to look a little different when we compare them with what we know about weapons and battle casualties elsewhere. So guys, if you've watched this far, thank you so much. You must have found Bill's thoughts on Azincourt interesting. If you did, please smash the like button, spread the video with your friends and other wargamers, and consider subscribing and checking out some of the other videos on this channel. One of the things I appreciate about talking with Bill is his willingness to reconsider familiar interpretations of history. And perhaps that's something we should all take away from this. Whether we're reading a book, watching a documentary, or even watching a video like this one, it's worth staying open-minded and thinking critically about the claims we encounter. Even when we apply logic and reasoning, certainty about the past can still be elusive. In Part C, Bill and I will return to the tabletop and attempt to refight the game from Part A. This time, we're going to be guided by his reasoning and ideas that he's explored in this battle. So keep an eye out for that upcoming event. Until next time, happy gaming!